Okay, welcome everyone to this session, which is jointly organised by New Local and TPX Impact, Community Power, Making the Dream a Reality. My name's Adam Lent. I'm the Chief Executive of New Local. This is a follow-up to our Stronger Things conference, which we had about 3 or 4 weeks ago now. I hope some of you are able, or many of you are able to be there. I guess I would say this, but I think it was a really successful event. We got really, really good feedback. People seem to really like it. We had in all about 900 people participated in the event, both in the real world and online. We had 29 really fantastic speakers, and there just seemed to be so much energy in the room and online around the issue of community power. So it's really, I think, really great that we've been able to work with TPX to put on this event where we're going to really start drilling down into the detail of the sort of practicalities around community power. So what is it that organizations across the country are doing? What can they do to, on a sort of day-to-day basis, at an operational level, make community power real? And we hear this a lot increasingly from all the people we engage with, is like, they're really getting down into the detail of delivering community power. I'm going to hand over to Tom in a minute, who's going to lead and facilitate the whole event. But just before that, could I just say, invite people, feel free just to say hello in the chat. Introduce yourself, say where you're from. It'd be great to see the sort of range of people we've got on the call and their responsibilities. You feel very free to keep your camera off. I'm not urging people to put their camera on. I know some people prefer to keep it off, but if you would like to turn your camera on, do that, because it's nice to see everyone's faces. It makes the whole event a little bit more engaging. And I'd just like to point out that we are recording the session just so that everyone is aware of that. So it's my great pleasure now to hand over to Tom Chigbo, who is the Community Engagement and Participation Manager at TPXimpact, and he'll take it forward from here. Tom, over to you.
Thanks, Adam. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you. I've got a couple of slides, but nothing too heavy to help us guide us through this. But it's really great to see so many people up early on a Thursday morning to talk about community power. That's exactly the sort of thing that I'm into. So hopefully you can see the screen. And just by way of introduction, so I'm a Community Engagement and Participation Manager at TPXimpact. My background is in working with communities and third sector organisations to help them build relationships with local government, with the NHS and with the police to try and make community power happen in various small and big ways around the country. And at TPXimpact, we are really passionate about this agenda. We're really passionate about the capacity of citizens to play a meaningful role in shaping their places and the services that they use. And it's really heartening to see that there are so many people who work in local government and around local government who are passionate about this agenda. And it was brilliant to be at Stronger Things to have conversations with people, but also to learn from your experiences. So to help us make sure that we're all on the same page, I know that some people in the room might have been at our breakout session and some people might not have been, but I thought I'd give us a very, very quick summary of the sorts of things we talked about at Stronger Things and some of the ways that we think about community power. And then after that, we'll have a little bit of time to chat amongst ourselves and introduce ourselves. But at Stronger Things, we spoke a lot about the importance of community power and how we can kind of see evidence of that happening in local places. And we talked about how community power as a concept actually covers a really wide range of policies, practices, and approaches that accept the challenges of the 21st century demand, the real shift in how we treat citizens and how we run public services. And we talked through a few examples and in small groups looked at different elements of how we can make community power happen. And this slide just shows you a quick summary of something that we've developed at TPXimpact, which I'll get into a bit later, which is a maturity assessment, a device which local authorities can use to assess where they stand with regards to community power and what steps they need to take to ensure that this principle is really deeply embedded and leads to tangible action. And the key sort of quality standards and elements that we highlighted were vision and strategy, participation levels, equality, diversity, and inclusion, resources, having workforce support, partnerships in the local area, leadership, and then opportunities for learning and impact. And what we discussed was how these different factors combine to ensure that community power is a reality. And we talked about some of the ways that they exist or don't exist in different places. And we were able to share a little bit of learning from our experience of working with organizations around the country. And we talked a bit about how those places where senior leadership has really clearly articulated a shared vision and inspired people to adopt participatory approaches to democracy are places where community power tends to thrive. We talked about the importance of building relationships and how time needs to be invested in building sort of face-to-face deep connections with people and ensuring that staff and volunteers have the time and the capacity to do that. And then the final thing we talked about, which helped strengthen community power in practice, was resources, making sure that time was set aside, but also funding was set aside to really do justice to these sorts of approaches. So that's a kind of very quick, broad overview of the sorts of things that we discussed. And it was really great to just hear different examples and experiences from around the country. But before we go any further, it'd just be great to kind of get the conversation started here. It's great to see so many people putting where they're from in the chat. It's great to see people from around the country. But over the next few minutes, we're going to spend about 10 minutes together, just having a quick speed share. So you'll be put into a breakout group, hopefully with another person, hopefully somebody that you don't know. It's just a chance for you to introduce yourself and have a quick conversation. It's only 10 minutes. And just as a start of a 10, I'd recommend that you maybe share one positive experience of community power in your personal or professional life when you have that conversation. And we're going to reconvene in about 10 minutes from now. In this next section, what I'd like to do is I'd like to share a couple of case studies, which we were able to touch on in our breakout group at Stronger Things, but maybe we can speak about in a bit more depth now to give different perspectives on real places going through the process of implementing something which embodies community power, and to share some of our kind of learnings from that experience. And then after that, we're going to have some conversations in breakout groups based on a couple of scenarios which may be similar to something that you're working on right now, to help us start thinking practically about making these dreams a reality. And the first case study that I'd like to talk about is that of Blackpool. So those who are at Stronger Things might remember that we mentioned working with Blackpool Council on their response to the climate emergency. And this is a really interesting example of council taking practical steps to make community power a reality on a major social challenge for the area. So the town of Blackpool declared a climate emergency back in June 2019. And since then, hundreds of councils have declared climate emergencies. And this has been a really important part of our nation's response to climate change, individual local places taking some responsibility and recognition of the challenge. And one of the things that was interesting about Blackpool's approach is that that declaration of a climate emergency was backed up by a really clear statement and vision from the senior leadership of the council that demonstrated that this was important, but also that demonstrated that there was an important and vital role for people in communities to play in solving the challenge. It wasn't just something that was the councils alone. The chief executive of the council, Neil Jack, was very, very clear in his public statements about it. He talks about how at the centre of Blackpool's approach will be our neighbourhoods and communities. And he talked about how it was important in responding to the climate emergency to use all of the council's networks to build a collaboration that stretched well beyond the council. So that really clear statements of vision and approach right from the top of the organisation help set the tone for how the town responds to climate change. And then in practical terms, what Blackpool did was they worked with TPXimpact to do many things, including running a citizens' assembly, which was designed around getting local people involved in developing solutions and tangible actions for the town to take in response to climate change. And that was a really interesting project that has led to tangible outcomes. Our approach was to ensure that the participants in this assembly were representative of the community. And so we used sortition, and we essentially gathered a stratified sample of 40 residents who represented demographically the makeup of the population of Blackpool. And then between January and February in 2021, they met together 4 times in sessions to reflect on the challenge of climate change, to hear from experts who had some insights into different elements of the challenge and different potential solutions, and then to deliberate together, which means talking together, getting to know each other, and discussing in detail how they can work together to find solutions to the issue. And many of you might be aware of citizens' assemblies as an approach that's used to bring the public into decision-making on a range of issues and in a range of different places. And I think it was really exciting to see that for such a big and complex and difficult challenge, the town was prepared to hand some of that back, so that responsibility back to citizens, and to involve them in the process. One of the challenges of delivering that climate assembly was ensuring that it genuinely was something that was accessible to different types of people with different needs. So it's one thing to send out hundreds of letters to people to invite them to participate in some form of assembly or consultation. It's another thing to take practical steps to ensure that all people can join in. And so when we worked in Blackpool, we ran an equalities impact assessment before we started the assembly to think through how we were ensuring that this approach was something that was accessible to all people. And there were a number of specific actions alongside the actual assembly which helped make that happen. So for example, we ended up running 30 out of the 40 people that participated in the assembly, because it was run on Zoom because of the pandemic. We ended up running 13 one-on-one sessions with people just to help them feel comfortable with Zoom and the online resources that were being used to share information about the issue. And that was an additional step that was needed alongside the actual assembly. We also lent people equipment so that they could actually access the meetings. Not everybody has access to good internet or data, or a laptop or a tablet which they can use for online participation. There was a helpline that people could ring so that they could get any support they needed to access meetings or access the information by phone. And participants received an information pack in the post to their house, which was written in plain English, talking through the issues and what the climate assembly was and what we were trying to achieve. And so those things, as well as having the kind of leadership commitment to this approach and the commitment to do an assembly, it needed a whole range of other actions to ensure that it was accessible. And that all contributed towards the success of the assembly. One participant who described himself as somebody with not a lot of time and who wasn't necessarily that confident in terms of participating in these sorts of events, talked about how they really started looking forward to Tuesday evenings, which was the night when the assembly meetings took place. And I think that's another sort of secondary benefit of adopting these approaches, that it kind of unlocks some potential and some capacity and potentially some energy and joy in people if we're willing to give them that opportunity. And I just wonder whether that person would be looking forward to Tuesday evenings getting into details of climate change if Blackpool Council just decided, we're going to make a plan, we're going to tell you what we're going to do to respond to this. Maybe tell us what you think about our existing plans, rather than actually handing the issue over to the public first before making their plans. After the assembly was completed, the group of residents actually put together a report which included practical plans and recommendations that the council could take to galvanise people and make the most of their resources in responding to the climate emergency. And to show the value of this exercise, Blackpool has a climate emergency action plan. You can see a photograph of the front cover there. And it contains 36 key recommendations for the town. And 31 of those recommendations came out of this assembly. So as well as sort of generating good ideas, imagine the kind of pride and confidence and energy that is created through people having the experience of learning about something, taking some responsibility for coming up with recommendations, but also seeing that decision makers and the power in the council is moving according to what they've come up with. That's extremely inspiring, and I think is a good part of why that climate emergency action plan has been accepted and work is actually being done on it. It's got real legitimacy because it's come through that process. So that's a kind of outward facing example and case study. But obviously making community power a reality relies on ensuring that our local government and our third sector organisations and organisations in places are in a position to adopt different approaches or work in different ways to really be open to the power and the insights that the public can bring them. And an example of where we've helped people do this is in South Yorkshire. South Yorkshire has a mayoral combined authority, which brings together Sheffield, Barnsley, Doncaster, Rotherham council areas on lots of strategic issues and is overseen by a mayor. It's a relatively new thing as part of a devolution settlement for the area. And so South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority is actually quite a new entity. But there's a genuine interest in South Yorkshire in involving the public in decision-making and adopting more participatory approaches to democracy. And so the Mayoral Combined Authority has been working with us over the last few months on how they can increase their ability and their capacity to adopt community power approaches in their work in the future, knowing that they're new and that there's a lot of potential to bring together the public in South Yorkshire to address major social challenges. And so what we've done is we've worked with them on a plan to develop their participatory democracy policy and practice. And we've taken a number of internal steps within the organisation to kind of build up their community power muscles. So one of those steps was to run a series of training workshops for combined authority officers, introducing them to participatory democracy, getting an understanding of the communities of South Yorkshire, and really embedding an appreciation for the benefits of these participatory approaches. We feel that's really, really important. It was part of what we talked about at Stronger Things, the importance of having sort of buy-in and resources behind community power approaches before trying to attempt something. And then alongside that training, we helped South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority to run a maturity assessment on itself. And so those key factors which I spoke about earlier, those 8 things which we think guide a council or an organisation towards good community power approaches, we helped them to understand where they were in regards to those processes. And that included reviewing all their kind of key documents and strategies, you know, what they write about, how they want to behave and how they want to interact with the public. We interviewed officers from around the county to see what their real experiences are of working with people and how they feel the combined authority operates. And we also supported them to run a pilot of participatory democracy. And that included running deliberative workshops in communities to help inform the combined authorities inclusion plan. And so by doing those things, we kind of helped guide the combined authority through a process which built their confidence and their capacity to engage in participatory democracy. And we feel that that means that as more and more opportunities emerge throughout the life of the combined authority to make decisions and involve the public in solving problems, they'll be in a really strong position and have a posture that is favorable towards community power approaches, rather than seeing them as things that are too difficult. And there are all sorts of tangible benefits and resources that we've provided with them with as part of that process. And you can see a photograph there of a summary of a playbook which we've written to help them kind of work through participatory democracy approaches, so that any officers who are confronted with a decision or an opportunity have something to hand to help them start working in a way which builds community power. So they're just two examples of real places grappling with community power, but kind of making these principles a reality. One which is about a kind of external set of actions which involve the public and which demonstrate a willingness to build on the power of people and communities to tackle social issues. The second example is about how, in this case, a combined authority can think really carefully about its own processes, the way it works, and how its staff operate to ensure that they are ready to take advantage of opportunities in a way which builds community power. So those are our case studies. I'd like to turn things back to you now and have a conversation about making this community power dream a reality. And to help us do that, we're going to break into small groups, and I'm going to give you a choice of scenarios to use as the basis for your conversation. So the idea is, obviously, not everybody here is from South Yorkshire or from Blackpool, and we're all from different places. But I'd appreciate if you could enter into the spirit of the scenario and have the conversation. That should hopefully help us draw out some real practical lessons and steps. And if we kind of imagine ourselves in these situations, even if they are not the same as the situation you're actually in, hopefully that will get us to a place where we're thinking really practically. So I'm going to quickly outline the two scenarios now, and then I'm going to give you a few instructions before we get into the breakout groups. So scenario one. You and your council leader are newly inspired to become a community-powered council. Maybe you and the council leader have just got back from a wonderful new local event. Maybe you're at Stronger Things and you've spoken to so many people and you're like, wow, I'm really inspired. We need to do this. But it's just something that lives, I suppose, between you and the council leader. What practical steps will you take to move from private supporters to public champions who inspire the rest of the council to take action? So one of the key things we looked at was the importance of senior leadership, setting that clear vision. And we talked about Blackpool and the example of the chief executive being really clear about the role of neighbourhoods and communities in responding to climate change. So what steps would you take in this imaginary scenario to go from private supporters to public champions inspiring action? So that's one option for your scenario. Maybe you're an officer in a council and you think, yeah, I can imagine myself in this situation. The second scenario choice you have, you and the council leader are newly inspired to become community-powered council. But in this scenario, I'd like to think about what practical steps you'll take to respond to officers and members who prefer a more traditional approach. So that might appeal to some of you who are kind of fighting this fight internally and realizing that not everybody is on the community power train. Not everybody has bought into these approaches, or not everybody feels confident or comfortable with working in slightly different ways. So this scenario is designed to get us thinking about, okay, what do we actually need to do to take people on that journey or to respond to any objections or criticisms that might exist. So lots and lots of really interesting things that are being shared. And I can see right now there's one group that even gave itself the name, The Power of Women. That's talking about the importance of data was one of the points that they made, which I think is a really interesting point about like making sure that data and intelligence is available and made scalable, and that communities have access to data about their place. That's really, really interesting. I've been working with one council this year that had basically made a partnership with their voluntary sector to basically create a kind of online mapping tool, which basically has all the interesting things that are going on in the community, but also all the work that the council's doing in one place. And community groups can access it very, very freely and openly, which then enabled more things to happen. And having that level of trust in that community organization to kind of host and run that system, I think was a big step for that council. It's really interesting to hear Group 6 talking about not allowing resources to get stuck. Is there someone from Group 6 who made that point, who wanted to say something about that point, like about resources being stuck? I know I'm slightly putting you on the spot.
Was that our group? I think it was that Group 6, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're just talking about resources getting stuck. So I think it was a talk about some money for a park, and there was a small amount of money given to the group, and then the council then just went and put a load of more money in park equipment somewhere else or within the park itself. It didn't speak to the community. But I think just a sort of reoccurring theme of getting money in, money not getting to where it needs to go, or the sort of paying for things that maybe people didn't expect it was going to have to pay for to put a bench in.
Thanks, Stephen. Money was a thing that's come up in quite a few groups. I had a good chat with Group 3 about the challenge of actually, if you are with that council leader and you've got the ability to take a practical step to move from being a private supporter to a public champion, one way you could do it is to actually release funds or to give different departments the responsibility or the permission to provide funds directly to community groups or to the community sector for engagement work. So one of the challenges that was highlighted was that actually, like, we make lots of demands of the community groups in the third sector, and we might be asking their advice or their support or for them to promote things all the time, but actually not funding them to do that. Whereas we might fund other, consultants or external agencies to do bits of work for a council. So why not fund community groups for their time doing that? That was really important. Another great idea from Group 4 is the idea of actually recognizing people as champions, or recruiting them as community champions in order to help facilitate that work. And then Group 5 have made a point about involving decision makers like cabinet members and also reporting to senior officers. I wonder whether someone from Group 5 wants to share a little bit about that relationship between this work and the role of councillors and senior officers.
Yeah, sure. So I think the idea was just that in a lot of council hierarchies, you kind of just need the buy-in from those senior people in order to get things done across the whole structure. And that it's a lot kind of easier to have that buy-in when they can really see what's going on and be a part of it. And that also really helps for them to be able to make the right decisions at the right time and whatever as well. So yeah, one of the projects that I was working on, we have our cabinet member for housing in our community steering group for a regen scheme. So he's right there in the process talking to the community members, and then they really feel like they're being heard as well because the decision makers are in that forum. Or we were talking about if you're trying to get project work started, you can go to your senior officers and talk to them as well. So yeah, there's a couple different strands to where that conversation went, but yeah, basically trying to get as many people involved in as many processes as possible.
Thanks, Rosita. That's really helpful. And I know that there was a group that forgot their group number that was talking to developing that point, talked about how literally the role of the council leader can be shaped in a particular way. And for example, is it possible to have sort of community power or this agenda being part of the kind of portfolio that the leader holds? And if that's part of their portfolio, then it kind of elevates the status of this work and encourages and inspires more people to take action. And I think it was the same group that talked about having some realism about what you can do and actually having a kind of some form of prioritization for your work. So an example was shared of a citizens panel that developed 86 recommendations for the council, but then they took the step back and allowed people to vote to prioritise them, and then the council are working on the top 5. And actually that process, allows another set of people to be involved in making the decision, not just the individual panel, but also I suppose it ensures that something tangible actually happens, rather than having a list of 86 things. Having 5 things that actually get delivered or that actually take place actually reinforces people's confidence in this this approach, which then means that they're more likely to join in the next time. Before we go into the speed share, were there any other interesting ideas, practical steps which people would like to share? I've not been able to go through every single thing that people have covered, but
if I may, I'm Amanda.
hello, Amanda.
I'm from Malvern Hills District Council. I'm head of community services, and so I thought I'd name myself because otherwise it's an anonymous comment. I just want to challenge colleagues around the narrative that's being used, as if the community is the council and the council are the decision-making body. We are to a very small degree, but actually the whole point for me about community power is going where the assets are, the community assets are, and they are already well established in our community. So it's not about seeking permission and saying, give money to different departments to do community engagement, because that community engagement is already in place by a whole raft of organisations that are within the community. I'll give you Malvern Hills, for example. We know registered, we've got over 350 VCS organisations that operate. That's a significant amount for a population of about 77,000. And no doubt in your localities where you work, that will also be a significant resource that's already in there. They already do, by their very nature, community development, community engagement as part of their practice. They are much more honed in terms of how to do that than we will ever be as community development practitioners. In fact, the challenge that I give, and I've got responsibility for community development, is that we aren't best placed to do community development. It's already in community. It's about how we help to facilitate that and to enable a voice. And it's about, I think the key challenge for me is about, got to change the narrative. If we really genuinely believe in community power, then we've got to see ourselves as an organisation, as a council, about how we can best facilitate that. And that's not about us being at the helm of it. It might be about being at the side, or it might be about being behind, or it might be about doing a bit of a pointing direction to go, why don't you need to engage, why don't you engage with these people over here? I just think we're institutionalised, aren't we? I've worked in local government for 20 plus years. I'm institutionalised, I am. But we've got to get out of our institutional space and work more within communities and understand what the needs are within communities and what they want and what they think of us as councils, because a lot of them will think we're shit. And we've got to acknowledge that actually they think we're shit. So how can we change that conversation to develop relationships of trust? We've got to do that by getting out of the shackles of the local authority envelope of which we're operating in. So you talk about hierarchy, and I can speak with a bit of confidence because I'm in the senior management team. But we've got to shake that off. We've got to challenge our elected members to go, look, you're a community leader. Who do you know in your community? Who are you engaging with? How are you finding out what the needs are? Who have you engaged with? And we do that as part of our induction with members. We used to have what was called council days. Meet your councillor. We changed that. Because you're like, no, it's not about communities meeting their council. It's about councils meeting their community, going out there, walking, talking to people. It's changing the narrative. And I think, there's a commitment here, isn't there, by the people that have joined this conference to make that change. We need to use each other as our peers, our mentors, as our challenges to go, how can we make that change happen? Come on, what did you do there that unlock that particular issue that we have? And don't be afraid to be a maverick. Don't be afraid to be a maverick and stick your head above the parapet. That's my kind of call to action, if you like. I'll shut up now, Tom.
Amanda, thank you for that call to action. And there's so many positive reactions in the chat as well. And also I think there's appreciation for your recognition of existing work in communities around, councils, for example, and the fact that yeah, we're actually all, we're all embedded in places and communities. And so it's not just about the work of an institution, it's about, the work of people in places, and that being recognized and supported, and breaking free from that kind of institutional shackles is really, really important. And just to make sure that we're all clear. So part of the reason why, part of what I've spoken about has been about how councils and bits of local government operate, is partly because there is a need to set like good foundations and to build confidence so that the power of those institutions is used as much as possible to enable and support community power in the way that Amanda has just said. And so there is a kind of part of what we're trying to do is, yes, we're trying to break free from that institutional kind of box, but also we're trying to make sure that the institutions that we do have are working in the best way possible to promote this new approach rather than resorting to their kind of traditional ways of working. I can see Sue Woodward, I can see your hand is up and it's been up for a while. If we take a point from Sue, and then hopefully that's given us enough time and we'll be able to get back into a quick speed share as individuals before we close up.
Thanks, Tom. I completely agree with the previous speaker, and I won't repeat what she says, but my frustration as an elected member at parish council level is that my district and county councils tend to talk community power but don't actually make it happen or enable it to happen. So we're seeing community power even in this conference as almost like through the prism of what local authorities can do. They've got the resources, they can devolve resources, but it's even worse when they say, yes, we love the idea of community power, but don't allow it to happen. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Sue. A really good point. And I can't remember which group I popped in on, but one of the comments that came up was there are some really basic forms of consultation, low level, tick this box to say you agree with us with the plan we've already made kind of thing. And people sometimes think that is meaningful engagement, that is empowering and genuinely involving the public in decision making. And one of the ideas of that group was actually helping co-production bingo, helping people to actually learn the difference between different forms of conversation and engagement with the public, to understand that actually that thing which we're calling meaningful engagement maybe isn't meaningful engagement, and there's other things that we need to do. Welcome back, everyone. So it's just been really good in the short time that we've had to hear some of the wisdom and experiences from you all, and from so many different parts of the country and so many different contexts. We've discussed and shared some personal and professional experiences of community power actually working. We've thought a little bit about some principles which give organizations a bit of maturity around community power. We've looked at a couple of case studies from our experience where we've seen it in action, and we've talked about some of the things that are needed to enable that to happen. And then we've used these scenarios to have a broader conversation about the practical steps that we need to take to advance this agenda, including changes around leadership and resources and ways of working in local government and the community sector. But obviously this is one session, and this conversation needs to continue. There's more work that needs to be done. And so there's just a couple of things that I want to share, and there's one exercise I'd like us to do before we go. So I mentioned that I'm from TPXimpact, and people might be like, who the hell are TPXimpact? What the hell does that mean? We're basically an agency that helps public institutions, so local government, community organisations, third sector, NHS, police, to think about how they work with communities so that they can shape and deliver change in a sustainable way. TPXimpact is a new entity because it brings together a number of different organisations, some of which you might have worked with already. So FutureGov is one that many of you might be familiar with, but there's a few others that we've kind of all come together around this agenda, and we're really passionate, as I said, about community power and developing the practical tools and support that organizations need in order to make these sorts of changes, because from the conversations, it's clear that all of these things touch on all sorts of different elements of community life and organizational life, from how we design public services to what our websites look like, to how we make decisions over big things, to what the job description of a councillor is. You know, it touches on all of these different things. And I suppose what we're about is basically helping an organisation through that process and providing a little bit of extra capacity and thinking so that you can practically get on with making those sorts of changes. So if this sort of thing is something you're interested in and you think actually we've got a project or a challenge or a thing which we want to embed community power in more, and we want to start changing how our organisation works in order to make that happen, feel free to get in touch with me. My contact details are on the slide, but we'll send around an email with contact details in, and I'm happy to have an informal conversation with anybody about what's going on and to build on this conversation, because it's not just about these workshops and individual sessions, it's about the work that you guys are doing day to day, and we want to support that.